Hi, in this video I want to go over how to farm DED sites in a Smartbomb in Praxis. Real quickly we'll go over kind of why the Praxis is the hole that we picked for this specific method. It is because it has a large amount of high slots and is a very large ship model. This matters because the Smartbomb area of effect actually is based off of the size of the hull, so you want to use a very large ship if you can. Typically, you would see people use either a Coil or a Praxis because they are the two biggest in the battleship line and also have a lot of high slots. The Coil has one more high slot, but is a lot more expensive. So if you want to do it a little cheaper, the Praxis is your best bet. You can see the general size of the ship here. The Praxis has one less high slot, but we can use a specific row bonus here, the drone hit points and damage, to help offset this by using sentry drones. So that's kind of the basics of why we want to use this ship. You can see the basic fit here, so you can just kind of review that whenever you please. And I'll pull up the more specific details and go over it a little bit here before we start trying to run a site. So the rigs is all to boost our capacitor. Smart bombs have a very high capacitor use, so you need to do a lot to make sure that your fit is cap stable. The high slots are all just T2 smart bombs. You want to use EM for blood raiders. T2 is a pretty long train, but it's pretty important because you want the most range and DPS you can get. This does work with T1 or meta. It's just a little harder. So if you can, you would want to use T2. The faction is actually slightly better, but if you did a full rack of faction smart bombs, that can put your ship into the 1.5 billion range just on the smart bombs alone, so that's very expensive, so I don't really like to suggest that method. We want a Microwarpdrive because we're going to have to do a little bit of burning, and that'll just help make that go very quick. We have a Grappler and a Web because there is a couple ships we want to make sure they don't get out of range, so we have to keep those. Then the rest of our mids here, just all Capacitor. Again, we need to make sure that that Capacitor is as strong as possible. Same with the lows, a lot more Capacitor modules. And then for tank, just a very basic EM Hardener and a Repper just to help keep us alive. So for actually running the sites, the two sites that we want to use is the Blood Raider Rally Point and the Blood Rally Point. There's two variations, and I can show you once we get into the site the importance and the difference in running each one. So for the Blood Raider Rally Point, we'll pick that one first. We just want to warp to that at 0. Before we land, we want to make sure we have our Hardener and Repper on. This fit is very cap stable, so you don't have to worry about that too much here. Just make sure that those are always on, and you should be able to tank the site just fine. The damage is not that much in the site, but it can add up, but you should be clearing the rats fast enough where it shouldn't really matter. So once we land, we can start going over the specifics of this one variation. So as you can see, when we warp to 0, we're going to land about 20 kilometers off of all the rats. Now typically in a smart bomber you don't really want this, but for us it's okay. So we want to Q-click kind of close to this sentry tower around all the rats, turn on our Microwarpdrive, and launch drones. Typically drones are bad for this because you would smart bomb your own drones, but because we're burning, those will be fine and safe right there. We want to start locking up targets from the farthest away to the closest. And as we start burning in, once we get past 6 kilometers by that red line, we can start activating. You want to stagger a little bit because they do use a lot of capacitor. If you stagger, it'll just help prevent any issues, especially if you have lower skills. Now we should see all the rats start dying pretty quick because this is quite a lot of damage and they're not very strong rats. Now anybody who's going to be a little out of range here, we want to put our Web or Grappler on it. This will just help keep them in range. Now see, this one right here is actually out of range. That would typically be bad, but that's why we have the sentries. We just want to focus the sentries on that rat, put both the webs on it, and they should have no problem tracking. Now, we could chase after that with the smart bombs to get a little bit quicker sight clear, but we actually will be most beneficial to just stay right here, which is going to be the respawn for the next wave, and you'll see that once these die. So yep, they spawned right on us. They'll start dying pretty quick, especially the frigs. You can see that we do get webbed and pointed, but they die so fast it really doesn't matter. So now that we're in our spot, we can just stop our ship, make sure we turn off the Microwarpdrive just in case we have any capacitor issues, and just kind of hang out. They'll all die way before we have to really worry about anything in this version of the site, and we can just sit and wait for the last wave with the battleships because that's the first thing we're going to actually need to worry about. Always want to make sure that you don't go AFK in this method because, you know, it's a big, easy to probe ship and people know about this method, so you can definitely get hunted down pretty quickly. So always be checking your local. Don't just kind of walk away even though it seems like, yeah, I could just be walking away right now. So this, I can tell just from doing it that this is going to be the second to last wave from the amount of ships that spawn. So once these all die, again, don't really have to do anything. Just sit here. The drones will shoot kind of whatever they shoot. And now our last wave, 2 battleships. We want to lock up both the battleships. And we're going to put either a web or grappler on one, and then the other one will get the other one. Now this will help them to not burn out of range because they do have a little more HP than the rest. Your battle cruiser should die well before it gets out of range, but just keep an eye on that. There can be faction battle cruiser spawns in this. They're pretty rare, so you just want to double check to make sure you didn't have a blood battle cruiser. If you did, you can just get the loot, and that'll help out. So once you get to either about half or past HP, you just want to switch your drones to the other battleship. If you do it at around half health in the armor, then they should die about the same time. I was a little slow this time, but again, doesn't matter. You can see that died well before it got anywhere near the 6-kilometer range. And now we just wait for the second one to die. Now that there's only one ship left, you can put your grappler on it as well just to help out. And as you can see, it's been, the average is usually about 3 to 4 minutes, and the site's just about done. So site's done, we didn't get an escalation, so now what we do is we go back, pick up our drones, so we just approach, Microwarpdrive back on, make sure you turn off your smart bombs so you don't accidentally kill your drones when you're going back to pick them up, and shift click. And now we just wait for the drones. This is the one thing about this particular method that makes it slightly slower, just because we have to do some burning to go back and get the drones. But it's not a huge issue. It only adds about a minute to each site. And if you have a typical system of 4 rally points, you can basically run and spawn them at the rate that they will respawn and just kind of continue running in one system. So this site's done. Now we go to the second variation, Blood Raider Rally Point. This one has a slightly different form. So instead of warping to 0 in this one, we want to warp to 20 kilometers. And then while we're in warp, again, just want to be sure you're keeping an eye on local. You want to make sure that you would normally have intel up. I have it hidden just so that isn't, exposing anything in the video we don't want people to see. But typically you just want to make sure you're checking intel, especially between sites, because really your only vulnerable point with this setup is warping between sites or the small window where you're either burning after you land to get to the farm spot or picking up your drones. So you can see here that the rats are right on 0 of the actual beacon. So if we warp to 0, we'd be there, we'd be able to kill them all and not have to worry about burning. But because we can't do that with the sentry drones, or we'll just kill them ourselves, we want to warp to 20 and then burn in. You can just start locking them all up in case you get something that's a little out of range. And again, once we get out of range of the smart bombs, just start staggering them on. Once we have them all going, then we can start focusing on the rats. So I can see right here, this one might burn out of range, so we just want to put all of our webs on it. Once we get here, we want to just give ourselves a Q click right on the spawn. You'll overshoot it a little bit, but it really won't matter. So as you can see, we were able to clear all of those rats, and the one that even might have been out of range, our webs and drones were able to take care of that for us. So now that we're basically in position, we can turn our Microwarpdrive off and basically AFK again. Not really, because you don't want to do that because you will die, but you basically could. So now that we're here, we're in basically right smack dab in the center. You want to make sure that you stop your ship. If a neutral does enter system, if you are at 0 velocity, you can just warp to your safe and be out of there very quickly, and it would be very hard for them to be in the site quick enough to actually catch you. That's why maintaining 0 velocity once we're in our specific spot is a lot safer. This is why the sentries are also helpful, because we don't have to make sure we burn to keep in range. When we're moving, we're less safe, because that's harder to get off the system in a quick and easy fashion if something does go wrong. So as you can see with the specific setup, our tank really doesn't get pushed at any point because the rats are dying so quick. They don't really have time to put a lot of DPS onto us. They'll also, as you can see, they'll spend a lot of time trying to kill the drones, but because we have a hit point bonus, you really shouldn't have to worry about the drones taking enough damage to die, because again, everything's dying so quick. Now, this site is slightly different. Instead of just waiting for the last spawn, there is another spawn that we want to keep an eye out for, and that should be, I believe, right after this wave right here, there'll be a spawn of elite cruisers. They have a little more HP, so they can actually burn out of range before the smart bombs are able to kill them. So what we want to do is lock them up. So right here we see Elder. So we want to lock these 3 up. They're the elite cruisers. And we want to make sure the ones that are farthest out get webbed. So this one is the farthest. Then we'll go to our second and web those 2. Now, if we match our sentries to their transversal, I see this one's going to have the best chance of hitting. So I just want to tell the sentries to focus on that one. You should see it'll die a lot quicker than the others. I can see it's so low that I now know I can switch my web here. This one's a little higher, so we're going to try to focus that one as well, even though it doesn't really have the best transversal, but should still die before it gets out of range. There that goes, and then for the last one, we can put both webs. This is where the sentries really help out. As you can see, that probably would have been a little too much with just the smart bombs alone, but the sentries and the webs made them die well before they had any issues with range. Now, because we only got 1 battleship spawn in this one, we just put our webs both on that, get our drones on it, make sure you check to see if there's a faction spawn, and now we just wait for this battleship to die. And that's basically it. That's all you have to do. You just want to keep an eye on which site you're warping to. One you want to warp right to 0, and one you want to warp to 20. Kill all the rats, and just keep farming until you get your sites. If you get the site, you'll get the little pop-up, and then you're successful. So another thing just to point out while we're waiting, the battleships do newt, so that helps with the staggering. The staggering is important because it won't take a huge chunk out of your capacitor at once. So even though the newt pressure is a little bit, it's staggered properly, so you shouldn't really run into any issues. If you do and you have 2 newting battleships on you, you just want to keep an eye on that. Sometimes your repper, sometimes one of the smart bombs will go off. So just kind of keep track of those and make sure that everything's running. So now, just like the other site, we go back to our drones and pick them up. And that's basically it. If we were in a system with 4 rally points, we would just be able to go to the other ones and keep farming. You will have 2 of the Blood Raider rally points and 2 of the Blood rally points in a 4 rally point system, and you can just kind of farm them pretty continually until you get your escalation or you get bored of farming. But that's basically it. That's all you have to do to be able to run and farm 6 out of 10 rally points in a Praxis. If you have any questions, you can always find me on Slack, and I will, as you might have already known, pretty freely share this information with anybody. So we'll just warp away back to our site and our video, and I hope you enjoyed.